like to welcome you to this session. In this session, we'll be looking at how humans learn. Previously, we've been looking at the 5 factors that underpin effective learning, and I hope you remember what those things were based on Phil Reis's discussion of factors that contribute to the way we learn. He came up with 5 factors, and you can pause and try to remember those ones. So, wanting to learn, needing to learn, learning by doing, making sense, and feedback. These are 5 important things that help us in our learning process, and we've seen that in our previous video, in the previous session. Now we'll look at how do we learn, how does our brain work, and from understanding how our brain works, we'll try to come up with implications that will help you and me in the teaching process. So in our, with the imaging technology that have come up with the MRI, they've been able to see how the brain works. And from there, they came up with some principles. Educators have been able to draw some principles to the way teaching and learning process actually happens. Now, our brains, the way it is designed, we have these things that are called the neurons, nerve cells. These are fundamental units of the brain and the nervous system. The cells are responsible for few things here that we can see for receiving sensory input from outside. Any sensory things from outside, it comes through the neurons. Not only that one, but also sending motor commands to our muscles for actions, transferring and relaying electrical signals at every step in our body. So everything in our body for our functioning, getting information, processing it, sending it out for action, and all of those things happen because of these teeny tiny things that we have of them. So many of them as well in our brains and in our nervous system, the neurons. Now, as you can see here, this is a neuron cell. This is one cell here. And it connects, as we learn, forms connections to another neuron. And the point where it connects is called the synapse here. And a synapse is a small pocket of space between 2 cells where they can pass messages to communicate. And a single neuron is said to have thousands of synapses. As we see later on, they say 10,000 synapses. Each neuron, each one of these ones, will have 10,000 possible places of connection, points of connection with other neurons. Now, everything that you and I know, it exists as a network, web of interconnected cells that work together, which they call the neuronal network. So whatever we know, when we come to know something, it forms into a network of these neuron cells. It's a connection of these neuron cells that results in our knowing. Learning entails establishing new neuronal networks that build out of an already established networks. So it builds on something that we know. That's why we should be thinking when we teach, helping students to connect whatever we're teaching them to something they already know, building off what they have already experienced, what they already know. Now, how do those new things that we learn, how do they become persistent? How do they last? Why is it sometimes we forget? And for those neuronal connections to be persistent, to be strong, a few things would help. One of them is the idea of use. When you use something over and over, you become an expert. You get to the point where it becomes natural, automatic. But that happens as a result of using it. Driving, for example, you've been driving for a while. Initially, you mix the brake with the fuel thing, and you press the wrong thing because you're not used to it. But over time, it becomes automatic through use. So that neuronal connection in your brain is strengthened over time. If I give you my phone number, you won't remember the first time. But if you say to somebody, if you repeat it to yourself, if you write it down, all of those things, as you do it through different senses, that neuronal connection becomes stronger and strengthened, and it will become persistent, and you can remember it. Your memory becomes strong. Another one is associating it to prior existing network knowledge. As you connect it to something that you know, if you take the numbers and you say, okay, this number is so-and-so's birthday and that kind of thing, if you connect it to something that you already know, then you will be able to remember it longer, so that memory becomes strengthened. The third one is associating it with a positive or a negative emotion. So when you attach some kind of an emotion to it, I like, you know, a young kid who really likes this girl, if she happens to give him her number, he's going to hold on to that. He's going to remember it because he's attaching an emotion to those numbers. They are not just any random numbers. They are special numbers, okay? So if you attach a certain emotion, you remember it. So in teaching, in learning, the same thing works. So as you allow students to repeat something, do it over and over, and use different senses for it, that memory will be strengthened. As you help them connect to something that already exists, that helps them. If you connect it with some kind of an emotion, show them the relevance of what you're teaching, and show them why they should learn it. As you do that, then the memory could be strengthened. The human brain, they say, has about 100 billion neurons. And it is estimated, like I said earlier, every neuron has a capacity of making connections with 10,000 neurons. So it has about 10,000 possible connections. Now, that would mean 1,000 trillion connections in our brain. So our neuronal system has that many connections. I can't even imagine the numbers, 1,000 trillion possible connections. So our capacity for learning is just limitless. We can learn so much. And yet we have to be able to follow certain ways as well. So we think of how does our learning actually work? What's the process of learning that happens in our brains? So very broadly, our brain can be grouped, has these 4 parts. It can have these 4 possible parts to it. Now, understand, this is very, very broadly to just help us understand the process. Otherwise, the brain is very complicated. So the first part of our cerebral cortex is what they call the sensory part. This is where the input from the outside comes to us. Okay, this is where the information from the outside comes to us through the different senses. Once the information comes through this one, it moves to this place called the temporal integrative cortex. What the temporal integrative cortex does is it receives the information, and here it tries to make sense of it. What is this? And tries to interpret it based on its existing schema, existing knowledge that already is there. What is it? And it's related to what it already has in there, makes sense of it, tries to interpret it. Once it makes sense of it and has an understanding of it, then it moves to the frontal integrative cortex. The frontal integrative cortex, based on this interpreted information that it has received, this information that has been made sense of, now it begins to plan, okay, what shall we do with it? What would be the next step? What kind of actions should we be taking? So the frontal integrative cortex makes a plan, and that is moved to the motor stage where actions will be taken. Message to the muscles and different parts is sent out for actions to be taken. So how does it work? We receive information, we have some kind of a learning experience, and then it goes to the place where we reflect on that experience. We try to make sense of that experience, and then we make a plan. What does this mean? What does it work? How does it work? What shall I do with it? And we plan for what to do with it. And the fourth one is doing it, actually practicing it. So these are the 4 things, and that's the way we learn. David Kolb, based on this, he came up with his learning cycle. And so he's called the first place the concrete experience. So students have concrete experience, some kind of an experience, something that they do. It could be listening, it could be reading, it could be seeing, it could be actively doing something. They would have some kind of a learning experience. In the classroom, whatever you do, however you get the students to get the information, you give them that information. But then it doesn't stop there. The students will go to the point where they will be reflecting on what they have gained, on what they have experienced. They may have been doing something, they may have been learning, reading. Now they would reflect on that and try to make sense of what they are learning. So you can see it is very much connected to the way our brain is divided, very broadly as I said. So it reflects on the learning experience that the students had, tries to make sense of it, and once the student has made sense of what he has learned, then he'll be thinking or she'll be thinking on, what shall I do with it? This is the abstract hypothesis. What can this become? And so the students will plan what he or she can do with the new information that they have. And the final part is the active testing, trying it out, doing it. So some students, they say, in the way he divides it later on in the learning styles, he'll say some will be reflecting on it, coming up with ideas. Others will be, let's try it out, let's do it. But the process remains the same. So concrete experience, the students will have some kind of a learning experience, and then you allow the students to reflect on what they have been learning, and then you ask the students to guide the students to think of what can this become, and they plan what that can become. And you also allow them to do it, to practice it, see how that works for them. Now, unfortunately, for the most part, like in our context here in Ethiopia, what we end up doing is we end up stopping with that experience. And the experience may not even be concrete. It just might be lecture. So they passively sit and they listen, and it finishes there. And that is just unnatural. So if the students get the information somehow in different ways, not just lecture, but in different activities, engaging them, and they get the information. But then you don't stop there. You allow the students to reflect on the experience that they had. What is it? How can I understand it? And help them to digest it, make sense of it, relate it to something that they already have experienced. Okay, so you help them to reflect on what they have just been learning and help them to understand what they have, the information they receive. So it's not just information, it becomes an understanding, it becomes their own as they reflect on it. And then you move them forward to the point where, okay, you got this, okay? You seem to be convinced about it. What do you think you can do with it? And allow the students to think what they can do with it, and even getting them to the point where they can use it, they can apply, they can see how that works. With your supervision, eventually it becomes their own. But then allow them to do it, see how that actually works, put it into practice. So when all this happens, that's how we'll say a learning has is actually happening. But if you stop here with just the information, pouring the information into the brains of the students, and do not take the students through this process, I believe that is very unnatural. And yes, that seems to be the way we function. But for you and me, the encouragement is for us to move beyond just pouring the information in, but allowing the students to have a good experience in different ways, not just lecture, but in different ways. Allow them to do it. Once they have experienced it, then allow them to engage in it, reflect on it, until they make it a part of them. They understand what it is. From there, it moves forward. Get them to try it out. Get them to plan what they can do with it. Okay? So, or likely to just pause and think for yourself. What would be 2 or 3 possible implications of this for the way you teach? Okay? What are some implications for you? What would be some things that you can change? What would be something that you can creatively add to your teaching experiences? Now, based on what Kolb did, Elmer, Dwayne, and Muriel Elmer, they came up with their learning cycle. Now, in their learning cycle, they call things a little bit differently, but they follow the similar steps. So we have what they call the recall. This would be what Kolb would call the concrete experience. So this would be the experience the students would have. Once the students have that experience, the Elmer will say, Dwayne and Muriel, they will say there must be an appreciation of it. So they've had that experience, and then you get them to reflect on their experience. Okay? As they reflect on their experience, they develop an appreciation. This is an emotion. On the next slide, I'll show you something related with our brain that has the emotion center there. So you help them to reflect on it. As they reflect on it, as they relate it to what they already know, as they try to make sense of it, and as they see the relevance of it, they attach some kind of an emotion to it. So you can see to the memory formation over there. So you are strengthening the memory of whatever the experience they had. And then the third step is the recall with speculation. The idea of speculation is, what can this become? Oh, I love this. I like this. This is beautiful. But what can I do with it? How can I apply it? So this is a way of speculating, a way of planning what they can do with it. And then the recall with application. This is the active testing according to Kolb. So this is application, applying it, okay? Applying it, trying it out, doing it with your supervision or on their own. They try, they report to you, you make corrections and all of that. So you can see between speculation and application here, between the two of them, there is what they have here as barriers. And this is true. Many times we like something, but then in applying it, we fail. We won't apply it because there are many barriers that cause us not to apply it. Sometimes we're afraid to apply it, we've speculated, or maybe we forget about it, or different things. So as the teacher, once the students plan to do something, there must be a follow-up, allowing them to apply, to do it, and then feedback, give them feedback, let them report to you, and you give them feedback. So some kind of a system to overcome the barriers. This is where Kolb finishes. But then biblically, in Hebrew, knowing doesn't stop with just an application right there or speculating. It has to move to the point where it becomes a part of our life. It becomes a habit. It becomes a character. So that's where we go, recall with integration. You want the students to move forward to the point where it becomes a part of them. So for you and I, for example, you may be learning, we may be talking about lesson plans. And you may have understood lesson plans, you may have seen the value of it, you may have speculated, you may have even in the teaching class, you may have applied some of it, but then until you actually, it becomes a part of you. When next time you are given a chance to teach, you develop a lesson plan automatically. The learning has not yet completed. So our desire is for our students to integrate it, to make it a part of them, for it to become their character, for it to become their habit. So in Christian circles, as a church, that's what we want. We want our students not to just be applying it for the sake of the class, but for it to become transformative, transforming their life, transforming the way they do things, just regularly. So that's where we want to move. So according to Elmer's cycle, recall, and then you want them to appreciate it, you want them to speculate what it can become, you want them to be able to apply it, but you want them to also, for it to become a part of their life. So the part that I want to share with you is this one here. So in our brains, we have these two places, the basal structures and the amygdala. These are the emotion areas where whatever we learn, you will have this emotional part that will attach emotions to the things that we learn. So the attachment of emotions to the things that we learn, it helps us with memory. So implications, number of implications for you to possibly grow in the way we teach. And I hope you can take a minute and jot down what are some of the implications for you. So going to a classroom and just pouring lecture the way I'm doing is not enough. It's important for you and I to cause some kind of an emotion, to show the students a need for the things that they're learning, a desire for it, for their learning, and that helps them in their actual learning. Allowing the students to reflect, allowing the students to see how it can apply, relevance of it, how they can apply it, allowing the students to do it. All of those things helps them. So our memory, the way our brain works, information comes in, but then we reflect on that information, we connect it to existing knowledge, and then we speculate, we plan it, and then we actively test it, we try to do it. And that is a natural way of learning. And may our teaching also be a reflection of the way we naturally learn. All right, we finish here. See you in the next session.